and welcome to the Publishing by the Numbers podcast. It is June 25th. We are already a third of the way through summer, which my daughter is already letting me know is not going to be long enough. She only got out of school 3 weeks ago, and yet here we are. It's just, phew, you blunk and it's over. So yeah, end of May. It is, what episode are we on, CJ? We're on episode 37, and today we're going to talk about Portal Fantasy with Jay Barnson. I'm here with my amazing co-host, CJ Anaya. Hello, CJ.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Welcome. And today we are talking with Jay Barnson, spinner of yarns. I know he is because he says so in his social media. Hi, Jay.
Hello, how are you?
Not only is Jay an amazing writer, he is also one of my nearest and dearest friends. So I'm really, really excited to have him on today. And I will try to keep the embarrassing commentary down to a minimum unless it's funny. You said yes. It's too late to back out now. Let's give you Jay's background because it's a fun background. Jay Barnson writes speculative fiction across multiple genres. His stories and nonfiction articles have appeared in several anthologies and magazines, including The Escapist and the Hugo-nominated Korsova magazine. He is the author of the rural fantasy Blood Creek Saga, the Portal Fantasy series The Vanished, and co-editor of the Haunted Yuletide anthology, which was a very good anthology, by the way. If you guys like spooky Christmas, it's totally the thing. Born in West Virginia, Jay grew up on a steady diet of science fiction and fantasy, much of it from the pulp era. He's made a career of building virtual worlds, from developing video games for popular game consoles to more serious training simulators using virtual reality. Between that and his writing, sometimes he's not really sure if he lives in the real world at all. So welcome to the podcast, Jay.
Thank you very much.
So last week, we talked about what Portal Fantasy was and some of the major tropes. So our audience should be primed with kind of where we're going. But actually, I want to take a step backwards before we start interviewing you about, your Portal Fantasy. You have this lovely phrase that says a steady diet of science fiction and fantasy, much of it from the pulp era. So we haven't talked about pulp fiction, and we have somebody here who loves it. So talk to us about pulp fiction. What is pulp fiction and why do you like it?
Oh, I don't know if we're going to get to the topic tonight if I get to talk about that.
We'll make it work.
Pulp fiction was largely, it was an era from about the 1890s, 1870s, maybe, if you really want to push it. And it was basically the era of cheap publishing became available. And as a result, these magazines were able to be put on this cheap pulp paper. And of course, they, just like all magazines, they had, ads and everything else, but to sell content, they wanted stories. And this was an era where, especially in the West, we were becoming more literate. And so the pulp fiction was the cheap stuff that was pretty much sold to the common man. And it was all kinds of stuff, for the working class, for the younger, for boys, for girls. As opposed to the, more upper class highfalutin stuff that was in the slicks. And it was an era of tons of storytelling, and a lot of the stuff that the rules of storytelling we now take for granted were in a lot of ways discovered or improved upon during that era. It was very prolific for authors, and there was a lot of great stuff that comes out. And we have a tendency today to kind of, look down upon it, largely because, I don't know, my own opinion is that, new authors don't like the competition, so they want to dismiss it as much as possible. But there was a lot of great stuff. And, that was the era where we got, Burroughs. Mm-hmm. We had Lee Brackett, who was the queen of science fiction, or queen of space opera. That's what she was called. You may recognize her as the original screenwriter for the little-known movie called The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, that little movie.
Yeah.
That one that nobody knows about.
Unfortunately, she died before the movie came out. But anyway, Ray Bradbury and a whole bunch of, other great writers during that era. And when I was growing up, I didn't know. I get these things from the library. I get these anthologies or whatever, and I had no idea how old these stories were. So I'm reading, I mean, I knew that Conan was, it was classic and it was old, so I didn't think that, they were still writing new Conan stories, just not by the original author. But I had no idea how old these stories were, and I read all these things, and that was I was probably more into that kind of fantasy than I was into, Tolkien. So anyway, and I recommend it if you can get a hold of some of these things. You read them, don't believe the propaganda. Yes, 90% of everything is crap, Sturgeon's law, but there's still a lot of great literature from that era, really exciting stuff. And these people knew how to spin a yarn.
Well, you got to keep that audience. And like you say, they had to spin a yarn quickly and they got paid by the word.
Yep.
So you learned how to use lots of really interesting words to describe something, because each one of those words was another fraction of a penny, and it all came together to pay decently.
Oh yeah. Oh, the pulp authors of the era. I mean, they made some really good money. Lester Dent, who did the Doc Savage stories and tons of others. I mean, he was often writing from his yacht, and so
Wouldn't that be nice?
yeah, they prolific and they had to sell.
Absolutely.
Which is great advice today.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels there with self-publishing, isn't there?
Oh yeah, this is like pulp era on steroids. It's great.
It's kind of fun. All right, so let's dig into your series. You have two major novel series. You have the Blood Creek Witch, I can say it, and that's the Blood Creek series. And then you have The Vanished, which starts with Queen of Monsters and goes from there. Blood Creek is completed, and it's 4 books, and The Vanished is not completed. And you need to write faster because I need to know what happens in book 4. Thanks, guys. But the first 3 books are out. And how many books are we thinking it's going to be at this point? Has the number changed again?
It hasn't changed yet, but originally I thought it was going to be 3 books. And then actually most of the way through book 2, I realized that it was really going to be what will end up being books 2, 3, and 4. And I realized it was just, there's a complete story here. There's 2 other complete stories. So right now we're looking at 7, but we'll see when it's done, it's done. But that's currently how it's mapped out. But I get surprised all the time.
Nothing wrong with that. All right, CJ, you haven't had a chance to talk yet. You want to take it away and start peppering our guests with questions?
Yes. Well, with these series, are they both portal fantasies, or are either one of them portal fantasies?
Yes and no. I don't know what you discussed last time about portal fantasies. I have my own definition, which might be a little bit different.
Well, that's okay. Hit us with it. We want to know.
Okay, for me, a true portal fantasy, generally portal fantasy, I look at it as both broader and in some ways a little more narrow than others. But for me, a portal fantasy is a visit from someone from our world, at least identifiable, close enough to our world, going to another world. The means of conveyance, I think, is immaterial. Whether it is literally a portal like a wardrobe in wartime England, or if it's, or some other method, like, they're died and reincarnated in this other world. It all works. The main focus for me is that this is we get to look at a fantasy world through the eyes of someone who feels familiar to us. So because a lot of times you have fantasy where you want to capture this sense of wonder. I mean, that's a big deal. And it's a little harder for when you're writing from a character for whom elves and dragons are everyday occurrences. So, and they might not even, from their point of view, they might not even comment on it. It's like, oh, just another elf. Whereas for me, I'm a reader. All the readers are like, tell me about this elf. Whoa, hey, wait a second. And so portal fantasy gives us the ability to look through the eyes of someone similar to us, and we can look at it, we're like, and they can describe it in those terms, and we can, and it gives us I don't know, a little bit better perspective. And so going back to that, in my view of it, the focus is on this other world and this character or characters making their way in this magical or science fiction or other world. And if they are easily able to return to our world, or if it's a character who comes from another world into ours, it's sometimes in a reverse portal fantasy. It's got a little different perspective. I mean, it's you know, their point of view on, you know, our world. It's not the same. Also lots of fun though. Anyway, Blood Creek Witch, actually the story takes place pretty evenly across all 4 books, between 2 different worlds. And so because they are crossing back and forth, it's less of a focus on this other world and more of a focus on both the other world and the elements from this magical world, you know, that have come into ours, or the magical elements that already existed in ours. And so so it's kind of a portal fantasy, but I'm a little more hardcore. The Vanished is absolutely portal fantasy. It is a series about many people from our world who vanish without a trace and end up in this other world and trying to survive there.
Oh, that's interesting. Ooh, okay. Okay. So what made you decide that you wanted to write? Did you just consciously think I'm going to write a portal fantasy, or was it just an idea that blew out of a dream, that blew out of, you know, you were sitting and just thinking, hey, that's a great idea, as most authors do, because we're never actually present in the moment, I have found. So
what,
is that
huh?
kind of what you were thinking? Yeah, Jenna's like, what were you saying?
I was away somewhere else. I'll be back. No.
So what made you
After a portal.
decide that?
Exactly.
Okay, this actually, there's a couple of preparing for this podcast. I remember back in 6th grade, there was a novel writing contest, and I was really excited about it. And so I started, you know, and I, you know, got through, and I guess the top 8 writers were going to have their books bound professionally or something. And I don't know what that meant. It might have been like 1981 version of, you know, Kinko's or something like that. I don't know what they're planning. And so I got really excited. I got going. And after about 80 pages into what was a portal fantasy in 6th grade, I then found out the rule that they kind of, you know, not really touched on when they discussed it as they were getting more serious, that the page count had to be limited to 32 pages. And I was nowhere near done. I was 80 pages in, and I was like, oh no. And I never did finish that. But it was a portal fantasy. Apparently, I've had a thing for it, you know, at least that far. And you know, I've read lots of them. I mean, Narnia, of course, I fell in love with that. I hadn't read the original, but I read a few of the Barsoom clones. So the John Carter, you know, type stuff. And so I've always had a thing for it. Actually, I decided, it was just a few weeks ago. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Jana, but I realized that my preferred, I don't even know if you call it a style, or not really a genre, is the clash between the mundane and the fantastic. And that's, you know, whether it's paranormal, supernatural horror, urban fantasy, portal fantasy, all that stuff. When you can take the mundane and the fantastic, watch them collide together, that's a lot of fun. And portal fantasy is a great way to do that. As far as like Blood Creek Witch, that was actually derived partly from Appalachian and North American folklore and the old Jack tales. And there were lots of stories about, like, you know, Jack finding a secret passage under a bed or something like that, or a hole, which is the land of giants or the land of dwarves and stuff like that. You know, so there was that concept. And so, of course, as I'm starting to write this, inspired by this folklore, that has to be part of it. And then once you start going there, you know, it's exciting. I mean, you want to explore this. You want to explore this concept. With The Vanished, I was really, really busy with another project, which has since been backburnered. But and I was focused on that. And then I actually, because I was doing a lot of reading and watching some shows that were Portal Fantasy-esque and also, you know, game lit stuff like that. I think I woke up one morning and I had an idea, and it was just as simple as that. And I said, okay, this is bugging me. I want to get this idea out of my head. I'm just going to write, you know, the first chapter or the first scene so I can have it in my documents, so that when I'm done with this much more important project that I'm working on right now, I can get back to this. And so that was my belief. 30,000 words later, I realized that wasn't happening, and The Vanish became my primary project, and that's what I've been mostly working on so far. So and I think a lot of that was just because I had been just out of interest and curiosity, I had been steeping myself in that world again, and I had in some cases I was really pissed at what some other authors did, and was figured I could do better, because I'm arrogant that way, I guess. I don't know.
Oh no, there's any number of writers that started with well, this is stupid, I could do better than this, and then
there was a lot of really, really cool concepts that I thought, I want to play with this. Maybe I have something to say. And so anyway, that's how it happened, kind of, sort of.
the broad brush strokes anyway.
Right. Okay. Well, you already talked about this, about the way that, you know, that balance between real world and fantastical. How do you approach that? You said that with, is it Blood Witch?
Blood Creek.
Blood Creek, that that it was very balanced in the sense that part of it was in the real world, part of it was in that fantasy world. And then with the other, you know, series, it far more into that realm of fantasy and not having anything to do with the real world? Like, how do you approach balancing those things?
I don't even know if it's balanced. Balance is a matter of it at all. It's all over the top craziness.
But it's fun over the top craziness.
No. We're not going to balance. We're going to just go for it.
You know, but yeah, you do want to have. I mean, that is the fun part. Is the contrast, and so whatever makes the contrast interesting, and it was fun exploring. Like, and I think it's in Blood Creek Devil, the last book of the series, when after they've been stuck in this other world for a while, they return to our world. And it was just one of those fun things to say, okay, yes, these people are very experienced, you know, they've grown up in our world, but coming back to see it after being in a kind of an 1800s-esque fantasy world, what do they notice? What, you know, and one of the things is how in our world, in a modern house, it's never dark and it's never quiet. And that was just one of those things that I'm like, I wanted to have a character comment on it, because we just had my air conditioning unit just kicked off just now, if there's a hum that has vanished. But that was one of the things. We have LED lights, we have little blinking things all over, we have, you know, the microwaves got the numbers on it, the climate control is going, and there's little hums of electronics going on everywhere. And anyway, that was just kind of fun to play with these ideas, and then having characters thrust from our world into a fantasy world. You know, I'd say from a writer's perspective, I mean, that is a ripe territory, and there's so much. I mean, I could write these books until I die, and you know, hopefully I will, and not even come close to getting the tip of the iceberg on, you know, what would it be like? You know, you get another part of my influence, I guess, was the old TV show The Twilight Zone, and just starting to kind of bring up these, you know, these wrinkles. You know, what if? And I guess that's probably the best thing. What if? Let's explore this. You know, we have a lot of fantasy where, including Portal Fantasy, where that stuff is just kind of glazed over, and sometimes that's appropriate. But I do feel like, you know, there's been a few books that I've read where it's like, you know, like with magic system, or, oh, I did this with magic, and I'm just like, wait, hold the phone. You know, there's a whole lot to unpack there. You know, it's like I guess the one example is, you know, you take the Star Trek with the transporter, and all the ramifications of this transporter. And especially when they started throwing more things like, keeping someone's old pattern in the buffer and memory and stuff like that. It's like, oh goodness, you could write a whole ton of books just about that one factor alone. It's like, let's explore this. This is cool. This is fun. Where can I go from here? So, yeah, I don't know if balance is the right thing. It's just letting that sense of wonder and exploration take you over, and just don't. I mean, I'm a plot guy. I really like the intricate, twisty plots of fascinating, interesting characters. But be sure to take a look at that world and just enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, you touched on, you said that Twilight affected your writing or influenced it a bit. You were influenced by that. Twilight Zone. Okay.
Yeah. Twilight Zone.
Yeah. Sorry,
not Twilight Vampires.
Yeah, not the vampires.
Totally different thing.
Sorry, guys.
old black and white strange men, old sparkly strange men.
I won't
there's
judge,
more things that actually cross over there.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting. Well, are there other things that influenced your writing specifically for Portal Fantasy?
Specifically, lately anime, actually, because that's a common thing. Also, lit RPG and game lit. A lot of times they explore the same kind of ideas. I heard an editor talk about how Portal Fantasy is an evergreen genre in fantasy, where a lot of other styles might come and go. We've had Portal Fantasies since, goodness, forever. I mean, Alice in Wonderland, John Carter of Mars,
the Greek myths. You go all the way back to very early myths and folklore, and you have that crossover between to the underworld, to the realm of the gods, to other places. This idea of taking the ordinary man and shoving him into extraordinary circumstances it goes way back.
Oh yeah. And so, I mean, it's always, and fairy tales, I think, are a great example right there, because just this fairy tales, the world of the fairy. I mean, there's some scary possibilities right there.
Well, ghost stories, there's definitely some back and forth going on with the what happens when you deal with the dead.
Yeah. And but the idea of actually being pulled into that world and then trying to negotiate it and survive it. There's again, going into the anime and Japanese are going crazy in this realm. Actually, they're calling it isekai, which literally means another world. And people, critics are complaining like crazy, because so much of these light novels and anime and manga are all isekai, and they're like, when are they going to stop? And granted, 90% of them are very similar, very straightforward and boring, but it's popular. People eat it up. It's exciting. We love that taste of that adventure and that otherworldliness, especially when our world feels like it's very explored now. And so that gives us kind of a new concept, new idea for adventuring. But there's one that's called ReZero. That is one of my favorites. And the main character, the twist with that is, as he pulled into the new world, his one ability is kind of a Groundhog Day or a Happy Death Day idea, that whenever he's killed, he goes back in time and gets to kind of correct his mistake and hopefully survive. And it is the idea of this, probably a character representative of a lot of the audience of this book, who's actually kind of useless. So I don't know what the author was saying about his audience, but he goes in there and he starts thinking he's the hero of this adventure, and he almost in less than 24 hours he is dead. And the time reverses and he goes out again. He's like, oh well, I'm going to do it right, and he's dead again. He literally cannot survive in this fantasy world for, in some cases, even an hour. But as time goes on and he builds up his relationships, and he starts discovering kind of the world outside himself, because he's very self-absorbed to begin with, he relies upon them to kind of help him survive. And but that is one of those ideas of like, how would I do if I were to go into a world of bloodthirsty barbarians and magic users. Wouldn't that be cool? No, it probably wouldn't be, because I would be one of the fodder that would end up on the ground. Yeah, again, within 30 minutes. And so, but that's that's a fun concept. And yeah, so animes, that and light novels, which were so named because they wanted to avoid the stigma that we have too often here in the US of having the audience restricted by age group, because they didn't want it to only be marketed towards teenage boys. They wanted it to go to a wider audience. So rather than calling it YA or something like that, they said, we're going to call it a light novel. In fact, they use the English for it, light novel. And so in hoping to cross that appeal and make sure they had female audiences, older audiences, and so forth. Anyway, lots of opportunities.
Nice.
Now. It's popular.
Oh, very much so. Okay, so one of the interesting things for me when it comes to writing this kind of thing, to thinking about writing this, I am not writing Portal Fantasies right now, y'all. I have other stuff to do. Maybe someday, because it is really appealing. But when you're thinking about this,
first free.
Yeah, I've heard that before too. If I do not finish the couple of things that are already series that are not finished, my mother is going to hurt me, and I shouldn't put her through that. So, but there's a world building issue here, because you're really doing two sets of world building and how do they rub up against each other? So when you decided, hey, I'm going to go to West Virginia and I'm going to have this West Virginia and the Around the Bend West Virginia, or I'm going to have someone disappear and end up somewhere else, what kind of work has gone into that world building to coordinate two worlds at the same time?
I think not having any idea what I was getting into was a real help there. I had a little bit of an advantage there because, again, I was born in West Virginia. And so the West Virginia in Blood Creek Witch, a couple of rules to begin with. It was first, this is not necessarily the real world West Virginia. This is a modern West Virginia as I remember it from my childhood. And in my childhood, it was all, it was distorted through that lens. And actually, my first fantasy stories were those, Jack tales that were orally, told to me. And so I was, looked into the woods and the hills out there, and it was, there, as far as I was concerned, they were filled with giants and dwarves and witches and trolls and all that stuff. So that helped me out a little bit. So I was looking at it there, and lots of time spent on Google Earth and Google Maps and stuff like that, and lots of research into what's West Virginia University really like, and what all that is. So there is a lot of that, but I could kind of get away with it, and I could say just by stating up front, this is not necessarily our world. Things are different. There's this history there, and so that was part of it, and that's what we have to do. And if you're ever doing urban fantasy, we call it rural fantasy. There is that element, and you get to play with the rules a little bit. You don't have to worry about historic accuracy so much. But yeah, it was hard because there was a lot that I needed to learn about it, because I have not been there since I was a teenager, I think. And so it was there was a lot a lot of research I had to do, and then I had to take that and just say, okay, given this little dark secret history, how would it be different? Because I kept the magical element secret, that made it a lot easier, because if you have a West Virginia where your next door neighbor might be a werewolf and you're aware of it, that's going to change things a lot from the current real world. Whereas if it's something where, every once in a while on a full moon, there's a lot more murders and not incredibly explained, let's just not think about it. That makes it a lot easier to stick with the real world as we know it, and drawing upon that. And so that was actually a conscious decision on my part to try and keep the magical world hidden. If you're doing any urban fantasy or anything like that, you have to make that decision: is how well is it known? How much has it changed our world based on this? Doing the fantasy world, that was another one where it was kind of a case of, okay, where do I want to place this technologically? What are the rules of magic? How much of an influence has all these things had? I decided that it would be cool to not do a medieval fantasy taking place in an analog of the new world, because we didn't have a whole lot of castles in North America, and those kinds of things. So I actually kind of made a decision to kind of base it on, since I'm a fan of steampunk, not that there's any real steampunk elements in it. I was like, well, let's do something kind of early 1800s esque. And then I had to go through and I had to say, okay, what kind of influence has magic had on this? Because magic changes, depending upon how common it is, again, how secret it is. Same thing with monsters. How has that changed warfare? How has that changed economics? And for the most part, I use fairly broad brushes with it. You don't need to spend 4 years developing these things necessarily, but you do need to think about them. You do need to say, okay, if you're dealing in a world with dragons and a whole bunch of flying creatures, then traditional castle design or fortress design, which didn't have to worry about air to ground attacks, that has changed, and you end up with something more like the modern era with bunkers and underground situations. With the Vanished, I still don't know what I'm doing on that one.
There you have it.
It's really, well, it's funny because the concept is, throughout history, a lot of these unexplained disappearances were people being taken from our world, given special abilities, and kind of brought in as certain heroes or champions for a particular reason that has not yet been explored. Book 5. Anyway.
You're killing me, Smalls. Book 5, really?
But anyway, so what you've got this, fantasy world where magic is uncommon, but still, it's like, okay, in any one village, you might have 1 or 2 people with some magical abilities. Then you have these people from the other world who have lots of abilities, and occasionally people naturally occurring who are also quite powerful. And so there's that element of how has that changed history from maybe a more standard medieval or ancient era. But there's also the element that you've had these people from our world coming through constantly and leaving their mark, including bringing their technology with them sometimes. I think it's mentioned in one of the books that, you don't have this sudden proliferation of higher tech weapons like firearms and so forth, because the people from our world who have knowledge of these better weapons don't want them to be used against them. And so they haven't been trying to muddy the waters of this world with that sort of thing. But you do have some things that don't match the real world analogs that of a kind of a medieval, late medieval era. That's kind of the basis of it. You have, especially, military organizations have a lot of modern thought added to them. In some regions, it really depends upon what heroes from our world came and what they brought with them. And a lot of them were just Joe Schmoes. I've got one in the first book. She was a teacher out in South America. What does she bring with her besides being kind of a badass? Anyway, and so anyways, that's been kind of fun to play with, but that is a question I have to keep answering every time I'm writing, is like, okay, I don't want to just go, I have to question a lot of these things, because you don't want to do just a generic world building feel. You have to think, okay, how has this changed? How do I want this to change? And what are the ramifications of this? And again, lots of what if questions. I love the what if questions.
Nice. And I'll say, as a reader, I really enjoyed that you explore monsters and creatures outside of what we see in a lot of traditional fantasy, because you talk about the elves, the dwarfs, the trolls, the giants, the whatever. And those are really a trope in fantasy that we see these things. But never until I read your book had I ever encountered a snallygaster. And having read your book, I don't want to encounter one either, because they're scary. But that you really dug into that, what are the stories and what are the monsters of West Virginia? And then you're doing the same thing in The Vanished, where it might not be an analog of a folklore monster, but you're pulling monsters that are not typical. We get a few, there's a really nice skeleton destroying scene in there. That was fun. But there are a lot of the monsters where it's like, okay, that was cool, and I'm not going to sleep tonight because there might be some giant worm thing come up from the ground and try to eat me. So I think that's an important part of your world building that is kind of a unique flavor, is taking on, where your monsters and creatures going to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, Blood Creek was especially interesting because, I mean, I could write, I shouldn't say this, I don't want anyone to think that I'm planning on this, but I could write several more books based on the whole North American folklore.
I vote for that.
Yeah, without covering like all the creatures I researched for this thing, because it's like, wow, we got a lot of creepy monsters, snallygaster being a perfect one. I'd love to do more about that, and more of the other creatures that I wanted to deal with. I want to deal with the moon-eyed people, or more I just barely touched on, kind of the Native American versions of the fairy folk.
Mm-hmm.
You have lots of the ghost stories and everything. And when I first started, I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be so much. I'm going to fit all these things into there. And by the time I got to the fourth book, I'm like, I'm nowhere close. And then sometimes, you got to get some original things in there. But it's a very different design for monsters though from The Vanished, where largely I'm kind of coming through and looking at things with kind of an eye towards magic meets biology and what kind of crazy monsters we get. And so you get some that are like the I had the one idea in the second book that was kind of the scarab beetles from The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. Which were really terrifying. It's like, okay, now what if these things were like, the size of a large dog?
All the no.
And then I also had the giant pill bugs with the the knife edged legs, multitude of legs, anyway.
And they'd poison you too, just to add insult to injury. Though I'll tell you, my daughter still is really upset that the camo cats are foes and not friends. She totally would love it if that turned out to be, a pet race sooner or later, just in case you have any ideas about somebody finding a cub at some point. She would totally, that would totally suit your 10-year-old audience who is reading these books.
Okay. Well, let's just say I make no promises, but I'm not taking that off the table. So
there we go.
So yeah. We'll have to see where the story goes. I know the general ideas, but the fun is in the details always.
Oh, always. All right, CJ, you want to hit him with one more? We're starting to wind towards the end of our show.
Yes.
But let's hit him with one more.
Okay, one more. Let's talk about upcoming projects, because Jana has already said, you're killing her with all of these books that are not written yet. So are you currently writing as a book 4 in The Vanishing in your series? 4 or 5 or?
No.
No. Jana's going to hurt you. Jana's not happy.
I took on a project with another publisher that will be taking up the next couple of months. When that is done, I'll be working on book 4. I'm also working on a book 0 that I intend to be a freebie that is a related one. It's about a third quarter of the way done. It's more of a novella, or anyway, and dealing with kind of the back history. And that one's kind of fun. It involves Amelia Earhart. And so I wanted to bring in some of these. What was that?
I'm in color me intrigued. I'm very intrigued by this.
Yeah.
Yes, she was one
Write
of the ones.
faster.
Unfortunately, yeah, yeah, not a big spoiler. Yeah, she was brought in. Her navigator was not. She's rather pissed about that.
Mm.
Anyway, but of course it's my Amelia Earhart who is, like 50 years later, as opposed to, necessarily the one who vanished back in the 1930s. But anyway, yeah, so I've got those, and part of it is this is ripe territory. It's like even when this main series is done, there is so much to this world, and I don't think I'm going to get off. I'm hoping I will, but by book 7, but I'm not sure I'm going to get off this one continent. And so I've kind of been building up all this other stuff, and it's mainly just been taking place inside of 2 countries right now. And so there's a lot to do. But yes, I've been pushing to try to get a rate of 3 books per year, which could have me done at the end of next year if I limit it to only 7. But I make no promises, because I keep getting surprised by this and going down some really, really fun rabbit holes. And hey, if people want to read it, I'll keep writing it. But I do have a conclusion in mind.
Well, that's a good thing. We do want to get to, the end at some point, or at least the end for these characters for now.
Yep.
And then you can go play in those other continents and introduce us to new people and do terrible things to them.
Yes. I do. It makes me sad, but sometimes terrible things happen.
But all of the Blood Creek series is out. So people who want to binge those, you can get all 4 of them, and it's nice and satisfying. Though I do still think that a nice prequel series to that one would make me happy. And you're supposed to make your editor happy. So I want those, and I want the rest of the Vanished. And if I wasn't excited about this other project you're working on, I'd kick up more of a fuss, but I'm excited about that too. So is there anything else you want to tell our listeners about where they can find you? Websites, social media, where are you out there?
Well, jaybarnson.com is actually the website. And I've got you sign up for the newsletter there and everything, which I'm supposed to maintain every week. I don't do as good a job as I would like. But I'm on Twitter as Rampant Coyote, but if you look for Jay Barnson, that's me too. Anyway, and then on Facebook, there's Jay Barnson, Spinner of Yarns, as you said. So those are probably the best places to get a hold of me. Yeah, please not lurking, in dark alleys, because that
All right. Well, we have reached one of our very, very favorite moments on the podcast, where we have now talked about so much meaty, righty stuff that we're going to now talk about completely and utterly irrelevant things. So Jay, will give you a minute to think. CJ, what is irrelevant in your world today?
Well, tonight, after we're done filming this, I have a date with Mumsy, with my mom, and we are going to go and watch The Little Mermaid. And what's interesting about this is that, so my family lives in a little small town in Utah, and I grew up here for about 6 years. And about the time that I grew up here is when the original The Little Mermaid, Disney's Little Mermaid, came out, and I watched it at this very theater. And so now I'm coming back here, where my parents moved back here a while ago, and I'm visiting, and it's just kind of really surreal that I'm going back to that same old theater to watch this new version of The Little Mermaid with my mom, just like I did last time when I was like 10 or something. I can't actually remember how old I was, but it was here.
What year did that come out?
Yeah, I can't remember.
80,
Now we have to know.
Was it 80?
92? 1989 was the first one.
Okay.
And now it's 2023.
Yeah.
According to the interwebs, which we know.
So
are
all these years later, full circle, seeing it in the same theater, I think it's kind of serendipitous. So that is my irrelevant moment. Yes.
That is just way adorable and everything. I love it. It's very, very cute. All right, Jay, what is something totally irrelevant that you would like to share?
I'd like to say it's totally irrelevant, but it's not really. But my wife and I got to go to a demolition derby the other night.
Oh,
And
fun.
I have, she had never been. And last time I went, I was, I don't know, third grade, second grade. And we spent most of the time trying to find my little brother who ended up being in one of the pits, talking to the pit crew. And so I missed most of it and I can't remember most of the rest of it. So, and we got to sit within dirt throwing distance. So we got covered with dirt and our ears, I think, were ringing. We should have done earplugs. Ears were ringing from all the noise. One of the cars got smashed up against the berm right in front of us, or just up to our side.
Wow.
Stuck there. And it was I mean, again, I hadn't seen one of these in forever, and it was quite the experience. But not completely irrelevant to writing, but I'm not going to say anymore.
Oh, all right. Interesting.
We're going to see a crash up derby in the fantasy realm. It's going to be awesome. You could do cool
how to
things
describe
with that.
cars colliding at high speed and crunching. Yeah. Lots of smoke. Lots and lots of smoke.
Yeah.
All right, Jana, what about you?
Oh, goodness. So I've talked about this before. I'm a grandma, and I have the world's most adorable grandson, and he recently turned 1. And preparing for his party, we're doing the grandma and grandpa thing. We're buying toys and this, that, and the other. And we happened to go to a family funeral for my husband's uncle. And while we're there, we're talking to his favorite aunt. And when he was very, very little, he lived with this aunt, and this aunt was a teenager. And so my husband was about 3 years old, and every morning he would go and wake Aunt Coco up by pounding on the door with this little hammer. So getting prepared for the birthday, Aunt Coco said, "I want you to take a present to your grandson." And she has ordered him the peg set with the little wooden hammer. And she says, "This is from Aunt Coco, and it's for him to use on his grandpa." And so the hysterics of, why did you get him oh, I know. This is revenge. This is Coco's revenge. And it's so sweet. It's so lovely. And he loves it so much. And at this point doesn't hit the pegs. It's just, it's a hammer in the hands of a 1-year-old. And yeah, I'm fairly certain the next time that we're babysitting, the hammer's coming with him, and I'm just gonna laugh. That's the whole thing, is I'm just gonna laugh because it is sweet, sweet vengeance from Aunt Coco.
Yeah, that's another full circle thing.
Yeah.
With the beauty of revenge tied in. I love it.
Exactly.
Awesome.
What goes around.
Mhm.
Well, Jay, thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. We'll probably have you back on because I want to dig more into lit RPG one of these days. And the Vanish it's more game lit. It's light. But we have another friend who's writing a little bit more hardcore lit RPG, and I'd like to get the two of you in a room and just, let it go and see what happens. So we'll have to do that when
thinking of that would be so much fun.
Yes, I just have to work out the timing. So once I get that all worked out, then we'll have a fun discussion about that, because that is another really hot fantasy subgenre that would be fascinating to dig into. But thanks so much for coming. And for everybody else, thank you so much for joining us. You can find the show and the show notes at www.elantumdigital.com and follow the podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast distributor. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review. See y'all later. Bye-bye now.
Bye, guys.